think in the 90s and the 2000s and beyond, there was the birth of this concept of transparency. And I think that it has taken on a mind really of its own. Um, and so people were feeling very comfortable kind of sharing and maybe oversharing um, the trauma and abuse that they've endured. And there was a rallying cry to kind of support that. And so now, it is very commonplace. And so, I need you to be transparent. Well, just be. And so there's this climate where there's almost a sense of entitlement, like, the expectation is there. And I think that's what breeds some of those things that we see in relationships. But I always will share with couples that you need to you have to work your stuff out and seek out things that help you to do that. So if you are struggling with communication, find resources that will help you. If you're struggling with finances, raising your children, if you're struggling with intimacy, whatever it may be, you as a couple have to do the work together to do that. But a lot of times, unfortunately, what happens is, and it's particularly more prevalent with women than men, but it does happen sometimes, I think, with men, is you have some issue or conflict in the relationship, then you go share that with your girlfriends. Well, they don't have any expertise around, one, your relationship, and two, you may not know if they are in fact supportive of your relationship, right? If they're going to just always side with you, or are they going to take the position of help doing things that are going to help to sustain and strengthen the relationship, which might include saying some things that you don't want to hear. Girl, you were wrong about that. You should have never said that to him. You were totally out of order. You have to make it right by first apologizing for what you did and asking for his forgiveness. And then maybe you guys can talk about how often does that happen? Not as often as it needs to, but oftentimes it is counterproductive because I don't know, maybe there's some level of envy or jealousy. But it is, as a body of believers, we are to edify each other. And so you got to keep that stuff close to the vest. And if you do need outside support or counsel, it has to be with people who would put your relationship first, because it makes a difference than what they say, right? So one might encourage, girl, you need to leave that joker, is what one might say, as opposed to, well, you might want to think about that because I kind of feel like you weren't right. And there was some justification, but we don't hear those conversations as much as we need to. And that's really what needs to happen. So no, keep it close to the vest. But if you're at an impasse and you do need some outside support, it needs to be somebody who values the relationship and supports the relationship. And who's going to be honest and truthful with you about that. So those would be the only exceptions. And so the person who values the relationship and or has a happy, healthy marriage, but it's hard sometimes to discern that. You don't know unless you're up in there.
I'm glad you mentioned the last part because I was about to say they don't ever seem to go to a married person and get their advice, right? It's
Mhm.
always Shaniqua down the street,
Exactly.
right?
Not
Or they don't
married,
ever
they've
want to
been
pay
married
for it.
6 years.
Yeah, or they don't ever want to pay for it. Like it's interesting, like because a marriage is an investment, right?
Yes, it
So you
is.
mentioned go to someone with expertise. When they're having problems, how many people, when they're having an issue in their marriage, they deem it serious enough that they're considering going outside of the marriage to talk about it. They don't ever want to pay for that advice.
I think that's very sad and unfortunate because it is, I mean, this is a major component of your life that impacts how you're navigating the world. There's nothing bigger that has that kind of impact. And so if you're in a crisis and you're committed, you've made this lifelong commitment, then certainly you would want to invest. I mean, you're not going to buy a luxury car and put cheap gas in it, you know? So the same principle applies. You've got to prioritize and make the sacrifice because it can make all the difference in the world.
I recently watched a show a couple of weeks back, and this couple, they were married for a number of years. They have two kids,
Mhm.
very religious. They go to church every week, and they're having some issues. And what they did, which I think is missing, is they went to a church elder. They
Mhm.
sat down and they said, "Church elder," the man said his issues, the woman said her issues, and he listened. And then his words, which I think you're alluding to when you said that, put the relationship first, he asked the question, "What you're doing to the man," he's like, to the man, "What is it that you're doing?" And he said to the woman, "What is it that you're doing? Is it in alignment with the teaches and the expectations of the marriage?" They both sat back, like, He's like, "That's where the advice is going to come from. You can
Mhm.
feel what you feel, you can think what you think, but once you agree to come together, you're at a responsibility to each other under the guidance of the religious expectations."
Mhm.
Now, for those who may not be religious, when you're in a relationship, you've come together with the responsibility of you two are going to make it work under whatever guidance you deem appropriate. That guidance, it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't ever include the involvement of your friends,
Right.
right? Because I don't know what vows they took.
Exactly.